What's up, everyone? Welcome to Wednesday night Mythic Conversations. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. As always, I am your host, Jeremy Gerard. I am the Director of Sales and Marketing for Four Horsemen Studios, and I am so happy to be here tonight talking to you about the lore of Ashes of Agbendor. So, obviously, the Mythic Legions Ashes of Agbendor wave is open for pre-order now at storehorseman.com. That pre-order actually ends this Sunday. So as of the recording of this, as this live stream, there's only a few days left for that pre-order. I know a lot of people like to wait right until the end. So thank you to everyone who is getting those pre-orders in this weekend. Once again, Sunday night, which is, of course, June 30th at 11 p.m. Eastern time is when that closes. Now, because of this new wave, the last few episodes of this show have, of course, been very Ashes of Agbendor heavy. We had, a show with Big Dub where we did just kind of our thoughts on the wave and talked about the wave itself. And we did talk a little bit of story on that, but not much. It was more just the figures. Then, of course, last week we had my friend and yours, Joe Vassapolo, on doing some pop-in swaps of this wave. So tonight we're going to talk about the wave, but we're going to talk more, not so much the figures themselves, although I'm sure that'll come up to some extent. But really tonight, what we're talking about is the lore, the story around this. And as part of that, it is going to be story time with Sir Gerard tonight. There are two short stories that were released as part of this wave's promotional efforts, one of which was released just earlier today. So the Sacrifice of the Blue Shield, and then the one released today was The Stand of the Angels of Cirrus. I'm going to read both of those tonight, and I may even do some voices as I am known to do. Before we get into that, Jeremy, is it possible to get a purple variant of the Mythic custom shirts? We will have to ask Len from Wolf King Customs that, because he is the one that prints these wonderful shirts, but I do not see how that would be a problem. Maybe what we'll do is we'll actually do a pre-order run of them before Legions Con. That usually sounds like a good time to do that. I know Len's doing a lot of other stuff, so very cool. I love this comment from Adrian saying, it takes the mouthpiece and storytelling of Jeremy Gerard and the Horsemen to get me to buy 5 of a figure that was previously never interested in. Gold Skeleton 2, come to Papa. You and me both, Adrian. It's been well documented that the Gold Skeleton is my least favorite, and I super dig the one in this wave. And we're going to talk about that character tonight, that he factors into one of the stories that we're going to talk about. So I am checking in the comments. Joe Vassapolo's in the chat saying, I know that guy. Checking the comments. Okay, yeah, happy Wednesday to everybody. Again, thank you for joining me live. Thank you for those that are part of the replay crew. So let's see. Last few weeks, let's talk, what's just been going on. It's been a crazy couple weeks show-wise. We've really been out and about. We continue to try to get to new places and check out new shows. Now that we're doing a lot of these street team Legionnaire-led events, that really does allow us to get out there even further. I know there are people that are clamoring, please come to Texas, please come to, California, please come. Everyone's got their places they want us to go. We're already looking at the 2025 calendar and seeing what new places we may get to next year. But even just looking at the last couple weeks, We did the Maryland Toy Expo in, of course, Maryland. That was our first time at that show and our first time ever in Maryland. That was, of course, with Wolf King Customs. That was an awesome show. Then the 2 weeks ago, basically 2 weekends ago, we were at Heroes Con with Toys R Ish and his crew, the Purple Gang and so forth. Now that was a return. This is our second year in a row doing that show, and it was cool. I wasn't able to attend that one, but a number of people I did go last year, and it was great to hear that people who had seen us last year were expecting us, and they came back and they were like, "Oh, I'm so excited. I was hoping that you would be back here." So that's one of the reasons we love to try to do shows year over year, because it builds up, especially when we're in a new location that may not know us as intimately. Now, this past weekend was Joe Fest. So that is down in Augusta, Georgia. So we have been to Georgia. We do Toylanta at the beginning of every year. Toylanta is one of my favorite shows to do. Not only the show itself, like the show itself is just really, really cool and a lot of fun. I actually kind of like the area that it's in, and I love the people that are there. This year especially, Big Dub picked me up and took me around. We went to the Puppetry Museum. So Toylanta is honestly, obviously Legions Con. I'll just take that out of the equation because that's a thing unto itself. I love PowerCon. I'm very sad that PowerCon's not going on this year, but very excited for what we're doing instead, which we're going to talk about in a bit. PowerCon's probably my favorite other show to do, but Toylanta would be a close second to that. I was told that Joe Fest has a similar vibe to Toylanta. I think that's accurate. It's interesting because both shows apparently started as like G.I. Joe centric shows. But what I found personally was that Toylanta feels more like old school Joes, like 12-inch Joes. This Joe Fest felt more like 3 3/4-inch Real American Hero Joes, which is what I grew up with. I loved that line as a kid. So I really enjoyed seeing all that stuff. A lot of vintage, good amount of modern, a lot of cool people there. I had some unfortunate travel snafus this weekend. I spent more time in airports with layovers, which, by the way, American Airlines, get better. You are awful. I've been flying American Airlines a lot this year, and I've spent so much time in airports I didn't need to spend in airports. So I spent more time in airports this weekend than actually at the show, but the time that I was at the show was absolutely wonderful. Once again, Ish and his crew, they totally took care of me. The local guys that were down there, and Snowy and so forth, they were great to be around, really showed us some hospitality, got me a Bowberry biscuit from Bojangles. So if you've been on the Mythic Legions Cabal, you probably saw the pictures that they took of me. I had heard of Bojangles. I think I've eaten at Bojangles before, in an airport, of course. I just had gotten a chicken sandwich some time ago. But I'm not familiar really with the restaurant. We don't have them up here nor up north. So on Saturday, they said, Jeremy, you have to try this. And here we go. Got Jordan here saying sausage Bowberry biscuit gang. So this was literally, they handed it to me and they said, try this. It's a sausage biscuit, but it's on a blueberry biscuit. I love sausage biscuits, first off. I was kind of like weirded out by it being blueberry. Oh my goodness, does it work? It is so good. It was one of the absolute best things I've ever eaten. I was immediately infatuated with that Southern cuisine. So very, very good. That was definitely a memory. That was definitely a highlight. But besides that, I'm being silly. The entire show was a lot of fun. Everyone that we got to meet was really, really cool. So thank you to everyone that came down this weekend to be a part of that. Because like I said, part of what we're doing when we get out to these shows is, not only bringing product out there for the Legionnaires, but it is genuinely about meeting new people. The amount of people that come up to the table and are like, what is this? They see the line, they see the excitement, what's going on here? And they want to know. They want to know, is this something I need to be aware of? So getting people to buy their first Legions and open them up and enjoy them and hopefully come back and buy more, that is such a cool part of what we're doing here. So thank you to everyone that was a part of that. Thank you for all the hospitality down there in Augusta this weekend. Beyond that, I was just mentioning PowerCon, and I'm going to just quickly look at the chat here, see what's going on, see if there's any questions or anything I need to answer. Okay. Gang. Yep, Big Dub is going to be at Charlie's Collectible Show July 20th. That's coming up next month. Those biscuits are magic in your mouth, Joe Vassapolo. Absolutely. Yes, I would love it if the Marriott lead at Legions Con had Bowberry biscuits for me. I do not know where the closest Bojangles is to New Jersey. They're absolutely delicious, though. So I don't want to talk too much about IshCon tonight because we're going to do that in a future show. But I did want to just talk, very, very briefly. So I just mentioned that PowerCon's one of my favorite shows. PowerCon's not happening this year. This is something we've talked about in the past through a scheduling snafu and what have you. There is no PowerCon. And, we had anticipated doing something similar at PowerCon this year to what we did last year. And by that, I mean, doing a wave reveal special for Cosmic Legions. So we are usually pretty secretive, until we're kind of close to the date about when we're going to be doing a reveal. This is one we've been pretty open about all year because of IshCon. So IshCon happens on August 3rd. It is down in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. This is a show that, as the name suggests, is being hosted by Ishwar of Toys R Ish and all of his crew. But we're going to be doing something really special at this show. It is going to be almost like a mid-year Legions Con Light. We've got some really, really cool stuff coming up for that. You can check it out at ishcon.net. I want to put that on the back burner for now. I'm going to probably talk more about IshCon next week. Okay, that's what I'm looking forward to. Get people excited, but I want you to save the date because trust me when I tell you, this is a show you're not going to want to miss. So with that, let's talk about the lore of Agbendor. So one of the challenges with this wave, and I talked a little bit about this with Big Dub, is we are at a very interesting point in the Mythic Legions line and in the Mythic Legions story. So we are working on the book. I actually took a little bit. Tom, super happy to see you saying tickets and flights are booked. Dude, pumped for that. Yeah, Curtis, wish you could be there at IshCon, but we'll see you. We got to see you at MuskeeCon, and that was nice that we didn't have to wait a whole year between it. So as I was saying, we are at a challenging point because we are working on the book, The Rise of the Dark Four, Volume 1. I took a little bit of break from that. So the book is fully written. It's gone through a couple rounds of edits. We really just got to put together the pages. Took a little bit of a break to work on Mythic Legions, the first 10 years, which is that kind of visual catalog of the first decade of Mythic Legions. Super exciting update on that. I just, probably an hour before this show, sent out a completed, I shouldn't say completed, I sent out a nearly completed draft to the team over here at Four Horsemen Studios, the owners, and George to take a look at and to give me some feedback on. So things are going well. That is progressing. Trevor is hard at work photographing all of the figures from the earlier waves that need that Trevor Williams touch for the photography. So I don't have a date for you when this is going to be solicited, but it is coming soon. Probably within the next few months, we are going to be ready to solicit that book. Sitting down and actually seeing it as a whole has been super, super cool. I think people are going to enjoy this. It's more than just a visual catalog. I was talking to Eric about it today, and yeah, Trevor's in the chat saying actually doing that right now. Trevor, check your email, buddy. I sent you a draft to look at. But it's more than just a visual dictionary. It's really, I think I said this before, but if you've been around the line since the very beginning, this is going to feel like a walk down memory lane. You're going to look at the stuff about the Kickstarters and those early waves and All Stars voting, and it's going to be like, I remember that. I remember talking about that and seeing that. If you are newer to the line, this is like a historical document that kind of takes you through all those early years, literally the last decade of this line. There's, a page for every figure. All the bios are in there. Every figure has a little bit of information, kind of behind the scenes stuff about that character. There's also just a lot of cool stuff that doesn't exist online. This isn't just regurgitating the website. There's a lot of information on the waves and on the figures that it's unique to this book. There's also a lot of images that, while they exist online, you got to go find them. They're all over the place. So to actually get a lot of those promotional images and early images and show images in one place, I think is going to be a very cool collector's thing. Cloud, it says it's going to be a big book. Right now, it comes in at about 360 pages. So it's not as insane as like the big Masters of the Universe book that Pixel Dan and Val Staples did. It's about half the size of that, maybe a little bit less than half. But that thing is a monster volume. So very, very cool. So my point was that we put the Rise of the Dark 4 book on the back burner for a very short time while we worked on this. So we are at the point where, for us to release new waves, like if we start moving the story forward, because Rising Suns was the end of the first story arc. Like all the characters of the first story arc are out there. Yes, Chris, it is 9x12. It's actually the same format as that Motu book I just mentioned. The challenge here is, and people even said this, right? When we first revealed the story for Ashes of Agbendor, people were like, we said, I forget exactly. I'll bring it up. I'll actually read what I said. Because we talked a little bit about Ashes of Agbendor from a story standpoint, and some people were kind of surprised that we had given some of the information out about this wave and like the story. So it says, in the aftermath of the Second Great War, the Legions of Dark have been defeated, but the price paid is a steep one. So right there, I know initially some people were like, you brought us up to the Second Great War, and now you're just jumping ahead. We're going to cover all of that. This is the challenge we're at right now, is we're releasing a toy line. It's almost kind of like, I likened it to Game of Thrones, right? Where you have the books and you had the show, and the show eventually outpaced the books. We're at the point where the toy line is outpacing our storytelling at this point, because it takes a while to get these books written and fully put together. In the meantime, we're a toy company. We've got to release toys to stay in business. So we can either just tread water for a period of time until the story's out there and we don't spoil anything, or we can start to be kind of strategic with things, right? This was an example of us being a little strategic. While we are saying that the Second Great War has ended and the Legions of Dark have been defeated, while I know there are people out there that wanted the bad guys to win, we also said the price paid is a steep one. So you don't know that just because their ultimate plans to destroy Mythos were not realized, you don't really know what happened. Many of the realm's greatest heroes have made the ultimate sacrifice, and those who remain are left to rebuild their shattered world. Back in Ophidian, an old wizard named Shui combs through the charred remains of the library As Agbendor's new master of records, he works to salvage the great knowledge once contained within the library's halls. He also begins to record stories of the most recent battles. For those who will rue the mythos of tomorrow must know of the heroism and sacrifice that helped win the Second Great War and which ended the rise of the Dark Four. So that is the setup here. One of the things that this allowed us to do was almost like prequels, right? We can jump back to that first age. Now, in the Rise of the Dark Four book, there is a little bit of information about the first age of the realm, because we do talk about the creation of mythos and all that. If you go back and look at some of my earlier episodes, I literally have an episode where I read some of the chapters that we debuted at Legions Con back in 2022. Okay, we debuted there. Eric and I actually announced the book there, and we read some pages in that session. I read those pages. It talks about the creation of mythos, the earliest times, the rise of the Dark Four, and the original Dark Four when they first were brought to mythos by Helios, created by Helios. All of that exists, and that's in the book. But we don't go into great detail on the First Great War. It's very much like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies, where they talk about that first War of the Ring. They show a little bit about it, but then they get into the modern story. And that's what we do in Rise of the Dark Four as well. The modern story with the characters that you have come to know, that you want to know more about, that's where we go. So this wave gave us an opportunity to explore some stories from that first age, which was a lot of fun. And we did, 4 pairings of figures in this wave, along with the Wizard Shui, who's tying this all together. So he's recovering volumes from the Ashes of Agbendor, from the ruins of the library, as they rebuild, as they're building a new library. He's recovering and restoring those books, along with the other librarians. He's also recording stories of the modern age, of what's going on. So in this particular wave, we get Kaipacha. So we get the story of that Jagualian thief who has to go on a heist and enter the White Spine and the Bloodless Throne to rescue Queen Artemis Silvercord. Those are events that are going to be in book 2. Like, all of that modern story is part of book 2. What happens with the fall of Ophidian and the burning of the Great Library, and as a spirit bender, basically coming to the rescue and calling up the spirits of the dead scholars to defend the Great Tower and defend Ophidian. All events from book 2. So those are things that we talk about here in the bios, but we didn't write short stories for them because they'll be part of the bigger short story. But the 2 pairings of the Blue Shield and the Malignancy of Gob Hollow, along with Yosef of the Golden Spear and the Gold Skeleton, those are characters from the first age that we really were excited to explore a little bit deeper and write some short stories on. So that's what we are going to read tonight. Will there be deluxe versions of the book or just a standard release? I don't know which book you're talking about. The First 10 Years book is probably just going to be a standard version. It being our first book, we don't really know what to expect. It actually ends up being a good first book for us to try with. I would love there to be a deluxe edition of the Rise of the Dark Four book, but that still remains to be seen what a deluxe edition would actually be. They're both going to be very nice hardcover books filled with art and photography. So very cool. Let's see. Checking out. Just seeing if there's any comments in here that I've got to get to before I go. Okay, so I'm going to start reading the first story, which is, once again, the Sacrifice of the Blue Shield. While I'm reading, it's obviously very difficult for me to view comments, so I will not be answering any comments or something while I'm reading. I actually try to avoid looking at them because they are distracting. So let's see. bring up some visuals here while I read. So this is the sacrifice of the Blue Shield. And this, of course, deals with the Blue Shield soldiers, the Deluxe Knight Legion, Deluxe Knight Builder Kit 3, which is, I guess, the official name of it, or the official sub-name of it. This short story was released a few weeks ago. Here we go. The old wizard bends down, leaning on his staff for support as he rifles through the rubble and ashes before him. A quick glance at the charred landscape that was once the great library of Agbendor shows the devastation left in the wake of the Second Great War. But Shui knows that underneath the ruins of the library, there is much to be salvaged. Not all has been lost to the machinations of the Dark Four and their legions of dark, and the realm has already begun to rebuild. Shui never wished to be the master of records for Agbendor, but it is a role that he has accepted, knowing that there are few others remaining in the convocation who could reasonably hold this title. The fact that he is the head of a library which no longer stands is not lost on him, but that simply means that the task ahead of him is one of rebuilding rather than governance. He is an old man, and he knows that this task will stretch beyond the years that he has left. But while he draws breath, this shall be his sole focus. A gust of wind blows, kicking ashes into the air and forcing those working amongst the remains of Agbendor to close their eyes and cover their faces. Shui pulls up his voluminous hood over his head and waits for the winds to die down. Once they do, the old wizard can see a blue-covered book that was hidden beneath the ash, but which now has been uncovered. Shui reaches down and gently picks up the book, fearing that it may be damaged and wanting to ensure that he does not damage it further by handling it. Thankfully, other than some charring along the edges of the cover, the volume looks to be intact. Shui wraps it in cloth and places it into the satchel at his side. He has found many books like this amidst the Ashes of Agbendor, volumes which survived the assault from the Circle of Poxis. They will be the foundation which the new library is built upon, the knowledge which will begin to grow until Agbendor is restored to its former status as the nexus of all learning and mythos. The new master of records is not a fool. He knows that the road ahead is long, and it will be many years before the lost knowledge of Ophidian can be recovered or rewritten. But that is the task ahead for the convocation. Shui leans back in his chair and tries to get comfortable. While the library and the Tower of Basilia were destroyed in the Circle's attack on Ophidian, most of the buildings that made up the schools of magic survived. Many of those buildings have been repurposed, and this one has become a refuge for the surviving members of the Order of the Learned, the Convocation's most accomplished masters and what remains of the faction's leadership. "What is that you have there?" a fellow learned master in the room asked Shui as he removes the blue-covered volume from his bag. "A book which survived the fire," the Master of Records replies as he opens to the first pages and finally begins to examine the volume more closely. "It seems to be tales of the First Age, specifically those collected from what would become Leandor." "Not the most useful of histories from a purely magical perspective," the Master states, "but any knowledge recovered has value at this point." Shui nods as his company begins to pour a glass of red wine for himself. "I see your bottles of Mercurian red miraculously survived the war," he muses. "It is as if Basilia herself protected them," the Master answers, "and thank goodness for that, for with Mercurios in even worse shape than Ophidian, who knows when the next vintage would be. Can I offer you a glass?" No, Shui says with a wave of his hand. "Save it for yourself and for others who enjoy it more than I do. Besides, I have a long night of reading ahead of me, so I will get to it." "As you wish," the Master smiles, happy that he is not being forced to share from his rapidly dwindling supply of his favorite wine. Shui looks back to his book and begins to flip the pages. The other master exits the room, but Shui does not even notice as he quickly becomes engrossed in the recovered volume. He does find that the first few pages are a bit charred, but he can still read them, and the damage ends before the first tale contained in the book begins. It is a story he is familiar with, as are most in Mythos, but which he has never read for himself. It is the story of Leandor's fabled Blue Shield and the incredible sacrifice they made during the First Great War. Shui flips the page and begins to read. My name is William Tornshore, and I am making this record on the orders of Sir Luric of the Blue Shield. I was assigned to the Blue Shield to serve as a squire, but my skills as a chronicler were quickly discovered, and I was instead asked to document the events of the battles as I saw them. I will do this task dutifully, and I hope that future generations are able to read my words and learn more about the troubled times we find ourselves in now. As our name suggests, the Blue Shield has been tasked with providing protection for the rest of the army of Leodicius. The Divine Mother has called all her children to her as we fight back against the evil forces that have risen up in our realm. Those forces are doing all in their power to prevent us from reaching the Mother, and the road has been fraught with danger. We have been attacked relentlessly by creatures that have become known as orcs, ogres, and trolls. But most of the attacks come from those that have been called goblins. These goblins are the smallest of creatures that have aligned against us, but the number of them and the sheer ferocity of their attacks have been a horrible thing to bear witness to. I am not a knight, and now I know that my calling truly is behind the desk with a pen and paper rather than upon a battlefield with a sword and a shield in my hands. I look at the brave knights of the Blue Shield, and I see a sense of courage and resolve that eludes me. They do not hesitate as our enemies fall upon us. They do not slow or fall back, but rather they push ahead, refusing to lose ground to our enemies. These knights which I travel with are everything that I am not, and all that I strive to be. Shui begins to flip through the pages of the book. Much of it is a detailed account of the Blue Shield's movements during the days of the First Great War. The author, William Tornshore, has done an admirable job of capturing the uncertainty of those early battles, back when the Empire were new to Mythos and the denizens of the realm were coming to terms with the horrors that had been set against them by the Dark Forest armies. The old wizard yawns. A day on his feet, collecting whatever scraps of writing he could find and directing others, and the recovery efforts has left him more drained than he cares to admit. He knows he will only be able to keep sleep at bay for a little while longer, and he turns now to look for the ending pages of the Blue Shield's tale that he knows the volume must include. He finds it and continues to read. Leodicius has taken the rest of the army ahead towards the center point of Mythos. We are told that this is where the Great Mother awaits her children and where our combined forces will make a stand against the evil creations of Helios. As for us, the Blue Shield will provide cover and ensure that the rest of the army can advance quickly and without harassment from our enemies. In the course of us providing protection to our forces, we have also discovered where the goblins are coming from and how they are able to move against us without us detecting their advance. They travel underground, using tunnels beneath our very feet to close the distance and ambush us when we are least prepared. Unfortunately, the discovery has also made us realize that we have seen only a small portion of the goblins' forces. We have greatly underestimated their numbers, and we know now that we have no chance to keep them at bay for long. They will overwhelm us if we are allowed to keep coming, and so our course of action is all but decided for us. The tunnels that the goblins have been using to hide their true numbers and launch their attacks on us have been part of their strength, but they can also be turned against them. This is what Sir Luric has said is the plan in the plan he has laid out. Our commander has proposed that we travel into the goblins' tunnels to engage our enemy there. Furthermore, he has suggested, knowing that we cannot win against their superior numbers, that we will collapse the tunnels upon our enemies to strike a decisive blow to them. This should cut off their means of escape or ability to attack our advancing army. It is a solid plan, but it is also one which must be accomplished from within the cave structure itself, which means we will also be trapped in the collapse with our enemies. Sir Luric has proposed this plan, which will be the end of the Blue Shield, but which will hopefully afford Leodicius and his forces the time they need to meet with the other armies of the Great Mother. There are only a few dozen of us left at this point, and Sir Lorik asked every one of us individually if we wished to lay down our shield and walk away from this task. He said that there was no shame in doing so, yet not one knight took this offer. Every man and woman in the Blue Shield proudly bowed their head to Sir Lorik and repeated their oath to defend the realm under the banner of the Great Lion. I write this account as my final entry. Sir Lorik sought me out and told me I was not expected to join the others in their task. He said that my job was to record these deeds for future generations so that they may know the sacrifice of the Blue Shield, and that I was free to carry the account away with me and make my way to the rest of the army. I will admit, I was relieved to be absolved of the responsibility of joining the Blue Shield in what is certain to be their final act of bravery. Still, as I write these words, I find myself unable to imagine not joining the others in their task, regardless of the finality of this decision. I have stated clearly in this account that I am no knight. I barely even had time to be a squire, but I am a member of the Blue Shield. If this final act is a blow that we can strike against our enemies, I will do so with a sword and a shield in my hands alongside those who fight for the future of Mythos. I will place this account where it will hopefully be found in time. It will be well outside of the tunnels, so the collapse, if it is successful, will not bury it. I will place this account where it will hopefully be found in time. If this account is found, please remember us in what we do here this day. May the example of the Blue Shield give you the courage to do what must be done and the resolve to make even the greatest sacrifice for all that is good and all that is right. We shall be the shield that defends the realm and the sword that smites the enemies who dare to stand against it. The next pages in the book are clearly written by another, as the change in tone is unmistakable. The volume is not the original one that William Tornshire carried with him during his travels with the Blue Shield. Rather, it is a retelling of the tale, presented alongside additional details gathered after the end of the First Great War, once the author's book was found. The identity of this next author is not mentioned in the book, as their contribution is not as important as Wilhelm's, but the final pages provide context to how this account impacts the realm even today. Schrey turns the page and continues to read. The account of the Blue Shield, as presented in this volume, has been transcribed in full from the original writings of Sir William Tornshire, a chronicler and former squire who was given the rank of Knight of Leandor posthumously for his sacrifice and bravery during the First Great War. No changes have been made to the original text except for the spelling of orcs and trolls to orcs and trolls, the latter being the accepted spelling of these races after the First Age. The Blue Shield's plan did indeed work as intended, and the Goblin army's attacks were stopped when the tunnels they were using were collapsed. Sir William Tornshire's accounts do not detail how this collapse was achieved, and no definitive proof has arisen in the time since to answer this question. Popular theory is that magical means were used to accomplish this task. While no evidence exists that the Blue Shield counted magic users amongst their ranks, there is also nothing to say that they did not. Calls to excavate the area near where Sir William's book was found have been resoundingly denied, as the area is held as a place of honor and an active burial site for some of the realm's greatest heroes. The story of the Blue Shield is told throughout Mythos, and as one would expect, it is most ardently revered within the kingdom of Leandor, which was formed by the soldiers who fought under the banner of the Great Lion. Today, the second in command of that army is the lone soldier permitted to wear blue. This is done as a reminder of the Blue Shield sacrifice and acknowledgement of the willingness of this second in command to do whatever is necessary for their king and their kingdom. As for the goblins, who provide the great threat at the center of this tale, their defeat was unfortunately not a final one. While the sacrifice of the Blue Shield prevented those goblins from taking part in the final battles of the Great War, we know now that their kind retreated deeper into the subterranean passages, eventually making their way into the Greyvein Mountains to establish what would become Gob Hollow. The history of this impure race can be found in subsequent volumes, including The Malignancy of Gob Hollow, A History of Mythos' Goblins by Master Scrawl. Shui closes the book. The story is a familiar one, but reading the words of the original author has had much more of an impact than simple retellings of the tale. The new Master of Records for the Library of Agbendor cannot help but see similarities in the heroic deeds of the Blue Shield, and those of the Convocation members who stood against the Circle of Poxus during the attack on Ophidian. Bravery in the face of so much evil and such seemingly overwhelming odds is worthy of note. This has been clearly proven by the longevity of the Blue Shield story many years after those soldiers had made their sacrifice. Shui is tired, but he knows his work for the night is not done. He places the book on the table beside him and he reaches for some parchment and writing implements. There are stories that must be told from this modern age of mythos. Tales of the Second Great War and the heroes who fought in those battles. This is also part of his job as the Master of Records for Ophidian. Not only must he try to salvage what he can of the library's former knowledge or work to replace what cannot be salvaged, he must also begin the arduous process of writing the new stories of the realm. For those who will rule the mythos of tomorrow must know of the heroism and sacrifice that helped win the Second Great War, in which ended the rise of the Dark Four. Shui dips a quill into an ink bottle and carefully presses to the parchment. He begins to write. The Second Great War is over. The Legions of Light have won, and yet we have also lost so much. Those of us who remain now work to rebuild our shattered world. But to move forward, we must first record what has already come to pass. One by one, the Dark Four were called back to Mythos from where they had been banished since the First Age of the Realm. But as in that First Age, the heroes of light refused to cower to these great evils. We fought against Erethyr, Alithia, Poxus, and Necronominus. Let us look back now, for this shall be an account of those battles and the story of the rise of the Dark Four. So there we go. That is the story, The Sacrifice of the Blue Shield. Again, you can read this actually on sourcehorseman.com. So on Source Horseman, under our blog section, you go to the top here, updates blog, you can actually see that is where a lot of this stuff, if you actually click the link here that says Lore of Mythos, you'll get a whole bunch of articles specifically about the lore of Mythos, including this one. So before we move on to the next story, there are some fun things I'll talk about with this story, because being able to hear it from the storyteller is a lot of fun, and I can give you a lot of little background stuff on it that was cool. Let me look at the comments here. So Kirby's saying, where is the ancestral home of the goblins? How do goblins reproduce? Are there female goblins? Do goblins have bones? If so, what color are they? So the goblins were created by Helios. They basically are part of his creations. In the creation myth of Mythos, Selene is the one that creates all life, and Helios is the one that creates all the land and stuff. In his jealousy, he creates basically twisted versions of certain things like elves and so forth and dwarves, but he also creates other races, specifically the impure are all of his creations. So he basically created the goblins. Some of the stuff that I kind of enjoyed about this, one of my favorite parts of this story, interestingly, is one of the last things I added. I literally added it as I was editing it one more time, and I put it online. And let's see how many of you caught this. So this story, right, which, by the way, I love stories within stories. This is literally like a story within a story within a story, right? Because this short story takes place within the larger story, and it's a story about this Master of Records finding and reading other stories. It's very Inception going on here. But the retelling of the Blue Shield is by a squire, someone who started as a squire and became a chronicler, called William Tornshore. And I named this character William Tornshaw. When I get down to the latter part of this story, and it's what happens after, right? It's, the way it's presented, the way I imagine this is the original book was found, and then people took that story and they transcribed it. In the other story we're going to read, we acknowledge the fact that after the First Great War, a lot, like all the different heroic factions, basically created volumes of their own histories and their own retellings of the First Great War. All of those retellings would probably be a little bit different based on their perspective. But this volume was found, this important story was transcribed, and then additional information was added. Did you notice that it says this volume has been transcribed in full from the original writings of Sir William Tornshaw? And I referenced the fact that he was made a Knight of Leandor posthumously. So the fact that we literally have him say, I'm not a knight, I'm not a hero. I look at these knights and the sacrifice they are willing to make. That is what I strive for. And then by the end, he makes that sacrifice. Like Sir Lorik, which, by the way, just not for nothing, that main view, let me find it here. This is not technically canon, but this is my own headcanon. And I guess since I'm writing a lot of these stories, I guess my headcanon can kind of be canonish. It still freaks me out that my canon can become real canon. This is not a named character, but in my headcanon, this is Sir Lorik. So that's when I was writing this story and I was thinking of Sir Lorik, this is who I was picturing, right? So I love the fact that Sir Lorik says, you don't have to come. You don't have to do the sacrifice. You're a chronicler. Take your story, let it be told, get it out here. And, Sir William cannot accept that. He feels like he has to sacrifice with the Blue Shield. He's a member of the Blue Shield. He's going to sacrifice. So the fact that we've got him being posthumously named a Knight of Leandor, I thought was a lot of fun. I really, really liked that. I also liked that little piece at the end about, you can find more about this race in subsequent volumes. The volume I reference is called The Malignancy of Gob Hollow, which of course is the name of the 2-pack, right? So the 2-pack that's coming out is called The Malignancy. So I use that as a name of a book. And I made a name for an author called Master Scrawl. And a number of people asked me, they said, is Scrawl a goblin? Yes. So that's just like we've got names like Swig and Snag and Gonks, all those single syllable names, some of which, when we made the name for Swig, we were like, okay, he's drinking a potion. What are some words that would be that? Some alternate names we considered Slug, we considered Chug, Swig is what one. So similar here, I was imagining writing, scrawling. So Master Scrawl is a goblin author of some kind. So I think that was a fun little piece that was in here. Obviously the bit about Otho. So, and we mentioned this during the reveal special, that the Blue Shield, the sacrifice that they have with those, with those blue tunics, that now in Leandor, the only member that's allowed to wear blue is the second in command. And in this particular story, we don't reference Otho, but because we're reading a book. When that book was written, Otho wouldn't be alive. They're just acknowledging this tradition in mythos in Leandor. And that was a fun kind of nod to why does Otho wear blue. And this is just kind of tying these little things together. We never had to answer why Otho wears blue. It was something that I always thought was interesting because he was a character wearing blue and stuff in a faction that's largely like gold and red and stuff. So little things like that. Those are all little tidbits that I was happy to throw in here. Let me look back. I'm going to see if there's anything else. I did see someone saying they really like Shui. Yeah, he's a really fun character. One thing don't know if I should tell you this. Now, what the hell? So the end of the story where Shui starts writing, that's the beginning of the Dark Four book. So the Dark Four, the first page of the Dark Four book is literally this. The Second Great War is over. The Legions of Light have won, and yet we have also lost so much. Those of us who remain now work to rebuild our shattered world, but to move forward, we must first record what has already come to pass. One by one, the Dark Four were called back to Mythos from where they had been banished since the first age of the realm. But as in that first age, the heroes of light refused to cower to these great evils, we fought against Erethyr, Alithia, Poxus, and Necronominus. Let us look back now, for this shall be an account of those battles in the story of the rise of the Dark Four. That is literally the opening page of Mythic Legions, Rise of the Dark Four, Volume 1. So something like that, where here's a short story that is talking about this guy. No, I'm not Shui, but I guess in this instance we're sharing it a little bit. So yeah, so Shui it's being presented. If this book that you're going to hold, Rise of the Dark Four, existed in Mythos, Shui would be the one who's recording it. So that's kind of fun, right? And by the way, I didn't do that to set myself up as Shui. I'm happy being Sir Gerard. I don't need to be Shui as well. That was certainly not my intention, but I love when things that we have become in world as well. I'm like such a sucker for that type of stuff, so I thought that was fun. I'm trying to see if there's any other pieces in here that were little kind of nods. Oh yes, actually, this is a fun nod. So I love the fact that another short story I wrote on the Red Star of Kabara. That is one that we released before the Rising Suns wave, that talks about a master, a member of the Order of the Learned, kind of an astronomer who makes a trip to the town of Doran, which is in the north of Mercurios, and he's in a little tavern over there, and he orders his favorite wine, which is Mercurian Red. So we have this little exchange where Shui is kind of in one of the schools of magic that survived the attack, and there's another master in there pouring a glass of Mercurian Red, and I just refer to him as the other master. But in the first story, all we refer to him as the master. He's talking to his apprentice, and we just call them master and apprentice. So yes, that was meant to be the master who likes Mercurian Red from that first story. And if you haven't already seen that, Mark Hausiel, the goblin known as Mock, he makes wine every year for Legions Con. His particular vintage this year is called Mercurian Red, which he most certainly got approved by us. We gladly allowed him to do that. So once again, I just said that I love when stuff becomes real world, in-world stuff. There you go as well. So those were some of the fun little tidbits that we added to that story, the sacrifice of the Blue Shield. So I'm going to check out the comments before I read the second story. Is it another disguise of Sir Gerard? No, Sir Gerard is not Shui. Very cool. Okay. So the other story that we released is a story that we did today. And this was The Stand of the Angels of Cirrus. And this was another really fun one to write. You know, that first one, it's interesting because the first story came together really, really quickly, because so much of that story I had already kind of plotted out while we were working on the wave and while we were writing the bios. Like, you know, the sacrifice of the Blue Shield, that was really there. And a lot of that story was also written like this one's going to be written as that story within stories. I enjoy telling stories like that. We actually did that as well with Cosmic Legions for Oxcrew Book 1. Right? Oxcrew Book 1 Thraxon, so much of the lead up to that was told through like log entries from the communications officer of the Gorgonox. And being able to actually like fit into someone's shoes and have them tell the story, that's a good way. It works really well for me because it allows me to tell stories a little bit differently. Because both of these short stories live outside of the Rise of the Dark Four, that was a fun storytelling method that I used. I will also tell you, at one point, I was considering, when we had because the Red Star of Kabira was the first Mythic Legions short story that we did. And I was thinking, okay, that lives on the web, that lives on our website. Maybe I'll throw it at the end of the book, as just bonus content. But then we wrote Tale of a Thousand Swigs. And now I've written these two short stories. So now my brain is starting to think, you know what? We're gonna release Rise of the Dark Four Volume 1 and then Rise of the Dark Four Volume 2, which will be that first story arc. We already know what the next story arc is. We're already got some of that plotted out and everything. But between now and then, I have to imagine I'm going to write some additional short stories. And it makes me think, you know what I'd love to do is maybe a third book, which will be down the road. That'll be kind of a little short story collection of gathering some of these little tales of mythos. So that's just something I hope to do in the future. Too many ideas, too little time. Okay. Let's see what we got here. The Stand of the Angels of Cirrus. Master Shui, you have some visitors. One of the junior librarians that has been tasked with helping restore the volumes of Agbendor says. The new master of records for Ophidian is hard at work in his study recording tales of the Second Great War of Mythos. The recovery and restoration of books is going surprisingly well as the librarians dig deeper and deeper into the Ashes of Agbendor. As such, Shui has recently spent much of his time adding new stories and knowledge to the library that is being built to replace what was lost in the Circle of Poxus's attack on Ophidian. See them in, Shui says as he puts down his quill and looks up from his work. A shadow falls across the room as a massive form blocks the doorway to Shui's study. A towering presence stands in the entrance before ducking down to clear the door's frame. Shui stands up as a massive warrior clad in pearlescent armor enters the room. The top of his great helmet nearly touches the ceiling, and the giant form looks like a cathedral that has come to life before the old wizard's eyes. A knight clad in the unmistakable tunic of Aetheron's Templar steps from behind his gigantic companion and bows to Shui. Good day, Master Librarian, the Templar says. My name is Sir Elijah of the Templar Emissaries. My companion is Sir Ukzak, Paladin of Aetheron. We come to you on behalf of the Crown City with an offering as you rebuild your great library. With these words, the giant paladin reaches out a massive armored hand, offering up a large parcel tied neatly with golden rope. What is it? Shui asks as Sir Ukzak gently places the parcel down on the table before them. These are volumes of our history taken from our own archives, Sir Elijah replies. They are precious to the Order of Aetheron, but we know that they will be well cared for here in Ophidian. The Crown City recognizes the great loss the Convocation sustained during the war, and we wish to do our part to help you rebuild. That is most generous of you, Shui replies with a smile. Please offer our gratitude to the Crown City. We shall, as soon as we return, Sir Elijah answers, but that may not be for some time yet. For in addition to the gift of the volumes we bring, we are also here to offer our services to your cause. Shui cannot hide his surprise at this last statement, and the Templar continues. As an emissary, my steed and myself are at your disposal to convey any messages you may need to deliver. I am aware that you have magical means of communicating, of course, but with the Convocation's powers stretched as they are, the Crown City felt that my services could prove helpful in certain instances. Rest assured that I am fluent in all commonly spoken tongues and should have no problem delivering any messages you may have. That is good indeed, Shui nods. That will be helpful to us. And your large companion here. Is he to accompany you as you deliver these messages? Sir Ukzak is here to lend his strength to your rebuilding efforts. Once again, you may have the magical means to move heavy stones and debris as you rebuild the great library, but you will not find a harder, more dedicated worker than he, and I would wager he can haul more with his back than even the finest witch or wizard could move through spells. The giant paladin nods his head and he places his hands together in a gesture of supplication as he bows to the old wizard. I help you, a deep voice says from behind the great helmet, and Shui returns the bow. Thank you both, the Master of Records says before calling back the junior librarian. Please see that our friends are attended to and given proper accommodations. They will be with us, and they will be joining our rebuilding efforts. The junior librarian nods and hurries from the room. If you would follow my young friend, he will get you all set. Thank you again for your vows of service and, of course, for your gifts of these volumes. I assure you they will be well cared for and will make a welcome addition to our library. It has been an eventful day for Shui, and he can feel his eyes growing weary as he puts away his quills and his scrolls. His assistants have prepared his meal and some mint tea, and it waits for him in his room. No doubt both the food and the tea have grown cold by this point, but Shui does not mind. Food is a matter of necessity rather than comfort for the old wizard, and so long as it provides his body with what he needs to continue his work, he finds that he has very little to complain about. As Shui rises from his writing desk, he looks again at the large parcel of books from Etheros. He has had them sorted and they have been temporarily placed on a bookshelf for him to review and decide how they shall be cataloged in the new library. Shui selects one of the books and takes it with him to his chambers. He needs to personally examine the volumes before they are added to the permanent collection, and he figures now is as good a time as any to begin this task. Sitting down in his chair, he takes a drink of cold tea and he opens the book. It is a fairly nondescript edition, with very little in the way of decoration on the book's cover or pages. He has visited the library at the Temple of Aetheron before, and he knows that many of their books are quite lavishly illuminated, so this volume's plainness is of interest to him from the start. Recollections and Prayers from the First Great War of Mythos. The title is written in a simple typeface on the first interior page of the book. No author is listed beneath this title, and Shui expects it is one of the many volumes from shortly after the First Great War that gathers together various stories and information from the first age of the realm. Each of the four factions in the Legions of Light have volumes like this. Many of them were written by scribes whose names have been lost to time. The stories they relate are all that truly matters, and as such, they are all that remains. Shui turns to the first tale in the book and reads the title, The Stand of the Angels of Cirrus. He is immediately intrigued. The angelic beings of the celestial city of Cirrus are a topic he knows very little about. Few in Mythos know much about these angelic beings, in fact, for their presence has long been a mysterious curiosity amongst the rest of Mythos. Shui begins to read. The Angels of Cirrus descended from their city in the clouds during the latter days of the war against Helios and his dark minions. As the heavens opened, we saw these perfect beings fly down upon feathered wings. The glory of their presence was seen in their likeness and in the armor that they wore, for both seemed to glow with a radiance that told of their celestial lineage. The angels were commanded forth by one called Yosef. Behind him formed a battalion he named the Golden Spear. The angelic army was numerous, and we looked upon their glory. Our hearts leapt with joy, and a renewed sense of hope came over us. On the battlefront, our forces were being led by the Crowned Eagle, with Sir Gregory on the ground at the front of our army. Our faith was strong, but the enemy we faced was terrible. Yosef and the angels of the Golden Spear spread their golden wings and made for the front. There they confronted the most terrible of all our enemies, a reaper in black robes that has come to be known as the Harvester. There is an undeniable terror in confronting death itself, and our enemy's forces were indeed death given unnatural life once again. The Harvester, however, was even more terrible than the rest of our foes. For while the rest of this undead army fought with a kind of mindless push towards death, the Harvester seemed to relish his work. Seemingly blind due to the bones fused over where his eyes would be, the Harvester still has no trouble seeing the victims before him. He finds joy in the fields of soldiers which he reaps, creating a blanket of corpses for his master. I am ashamed to admit that the sight of this unholy creature was enough to cause myself and many within our ranks to question our convictions and wish to be anywhere but on the battlefield against this monster. O Etheron, praise thy light and protect me from the evil which I face. Yosef and his angels showed no such fear. They confronted the Harvester immediately upon entering the battle, and our hearts did indeed leap with joy. The joy was short-lived, for the Harvester was not to be stopped. The first angel to encounter Necronominus's Reaper was also the first to fall. His armor proved no match as the Harvester swung his scythe wide, cleaving through the angel's breastplate and smiling as the celestial being crashed lifelessly to the dirt and grime of the blood-soaked battlefield. Another angel thrust towards the Harvester, and the tip of the spear tore through the Reaper's black robes, but the blow did nothing to slow him down. The Harvester reached ahead with an hourglass swimming with the souls of his victims, and the angel fell to its knees, clutching its throat as the life was drawn out of its body and into the hourglass. One by one, the Angels of Cirrus fell. Divine and powerful they were, and yet they could do nothing to slow the advance of the Harvester. They were little more than a momentary nuisance to him, and our forces began to weep for all we had lost. And still, the situation was about to grow worse. For there is a fate more terrible than death when death is not the natural end of one's life, but rather a prolonged state of being. The Harvester stood amidst the bodies of fallen angels of Cirrus as his master Necronominus himself rode forward upon his skeletal steed. The clopping of the horse's hooves seemed to echo across the battlefield like bells tolling or the thunder of a coming storm announcing its arrival. Raising his weapon, the god raiser above his head, Necronominus began to sing a chilling hymn. The sound somehow emanating from within the bones of his hollow chest. There is no natural way that the dead can sing, and yet sing he did, and it was terrible. The god raiser began to glow with a green and yellow haze that trailed down like tendrils towards the fallen bodies at the Harvester's feet. The mist enveloped those bodies as the Lord of Death continued his song, and the dead began to stir. Unnatural life entered their bodies, and our forces watched in horror as the flesh of the angels slowly melted away, revealing golden bones and eyeless skulls that peered out from behind faceplates of their angelic armor. These golden skeletons began to rise, still possessing the feathered wings as a mockery of the celestial beings they once were. The golden light of Cirrus was gone from those wings, however, and a greenish hue had begun to seep out from the feathers, almost as if life itself was being drained from them. "Rise, children of the clouds," Necronominus commanded. "Upon my altar you now pray. Bring me death. For this is the end of times, and to the cold we shall lead this flock." The last of the Angels of Cirrus was their commander, Yosef. To his credit, he did not waver in the face of certain doom, and he beat his wings now to confront not only the harvester and his unholy master, but also a battalion of undead angels who once fought by his side. Yosef knew his end was near, and yet he fought even then. Praise be to the brave and to the righteous, for in their example shall we find the path to victory. The angelic warrior was joined by the crowned eagle and by Sir Gregory, the man who would, in time, become the first to brandish the heaven's brand sword and take that name as his own. Together they faced an unstoppable evil, and they stopped it. For the light of Aetheron shone brightly on this day, and not even the blackness of the grave or the cold grip of death itself could diminish that great light. Aetheron be praised, for in your name and in the name of the Great Mother do we fight. In the end, Yosef himself defeated the harvester. Beating his large wings against the reaper to confuse him, the angel aimed not to injure a being who had thus far proven impervious to physical damage, but rather to separate him from his tools of power. Snatching the scythe and the hourglass from the harvester's hands, he flew away as a horrible wail emerged from the monster. It was the only sound the silent harvester had made this day, and all who heard that wail fell to their knees, covering their ears as tears of blood poured from their eyes. Aetheron, shield us, and let us not hear evil's voice or know it speak. The wail affected Yosef as well, and he began to stumble, but he refused to drop what he had taken. Pushing the terror away, the angel flew high and far to where the harvester could not follow. A score of tuberculi gave chase, but their vestigial wings were no match for those of Yosef, and he quickly pulled away from his enemies and made his escape. Dropping the scythe and the hourglass into the deep waters off the shores of what is now known as Etheros, Yosef immediately raced back to the battlefield. By the time he returned, the battle was all but finished. The diseased one, Poxus, had been banished along with many of his minions, and the other dark powers would soon follow. Great Mother be praised, and may the legions of light live long. So it is written here in this account that the Angels of Cirrus gave their lives in defense of the realm. The angels are now only a memory of our past, and Cirrus has remained silent and unknown to us ever since. O Angels of Cirrus, we pray for you and honor your sacrifice. In our name and in the name of Aetheron, may his light guide thee home and cast out the darkness of death. So it is written, praise be for all days that thus remain. Shui closes the book and sits silently for a time. He considers the parallels between the battles of the First Great War and the losses that the Legions of Light sustained in the latest battles to save the realm. The more he reads of the past, the more he realizes the importance recording the stories of the Second Great War for future generations to learn from. The old wizard rises from his seat and finishes his tea. It is late, but he feels a renewed vigor in his bones, and he knows that there will be no sleep for him this night, for there is much work to be done. Returning to his study, Shui opens a new scroll and dips a quill in some ink. He knows which story he will record next, for it is one he has thus far been hesitant to commit to words: the fall of Ophidian and the burning of the great library of Agbendor. He begins to write. The circle of Poxus's attack on the Tower of Basilia came when we least expected it. We should have been prepared for such an assault, yet, for all our knowledge and years of study, we did not see the signs, nor did we understand the true scope of the power which our enemy brought to bear against us. In the end, it was one of Poxus's own who saved us from total destruction. A necromancer whom the deceased one called forth in the first age of the realm. For her powers, her fearlessness, and her commitment to our convocation, alongside the spirits of the learned who once roamed The dusty corridors of Ophidian were our salvation on this fateful day. This is the story of how the convocation of Basilia was nearly destroyed. And how, like the great fiery phoenix of legend, we rose from the ashes of Agbendor to the dawn of a new day. So begins this tale. And that's the end of that story. And of course, the story that he's referencing at the end there is as a spirit bender calling up these spirits. So just as the first story kind of ends with Shui starting to basically write Rise of the Dark Four, this story basically ends with him starting to write the recollection from the fall of Ophidian, specifically starting with this story that we alluded to in the bios of the Circle of Poxus attacking, the Shadow Centaurs, basically hunting down the leaders of the convocation, and as a spirit bender being revealed as actually a being of the first age that Poxus had called into mythos and who had thereafter broken free from the influence of Poxus and the Dark Four, and who now swore loyalty to the convocation, how she stood up and defended her people, defended the tower, and basically chased Poxus and the circle away to allow the convocation to not be totally destroyed. So there we go. Now, there are some other things in here that obviously I like a lot. I think the first thing is the cameos in the beginning. So as I was writing this story, and this one was a little bit tougher to put together than the first book, because in this one I knew that there was the stuff about the angels, but I didn't want to write like a giant battle sequence. We have some more extended battle sequences in the Rise of the Dark Four, but I wanted this to be more of a recollection, and I wanted it, there's a lot of stuff in the way it's written where there's paragraphs that end with what is basically prayers, right? Because it's being written by essentially holy scribes. This is from the Order of Aetheron, a very religious organization. So I definitely wanted that. Greg is telling me to check my phone. Greg sent me a very funny photo. I like it a lot. Anyway, but so my point is I wanted to do more with this, and I loved the idea of Shui not only recovering books from the ashes and recording new ones, but the idea of the Crown City, they would have libraries, they would have books and everything. Actually bringing some of their volumes to give to Ophidian to help them rebuild the library. So this also allowed me, because we are now at the point, this all takes place after the Second Great War. So any character that I introduce, that I drop in here as a cameo, they survived the Second Great War. So I was looking at the characters from Order of Aetheron, and these were the characters. I knew I wanted it to be Sir Uxak. I just thought it would be fun. I knew Greg would get a kick out of it. And I enjoyed having that character in this story because it's such an unexpected cameo in this, right? And then I said, okay, who am I going to pair Uxak with? And the pairing of Sir Uxak with Sir Elijah, it felt unexpected and unusual. And I love that type of stuff. So the two of these traveling together, I thought was a lot of fun. But as I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, they have a purpose, because they do have a skill set. The fact that he is, a messenger, we said right in his bio that he speaks a lot of languages. It would make sense that he would lend his efforts. And I love the fact of the different factions now trying to help each other. And it even says we recognize, what Ophidian lost, we're here to help. So pairing these two together, that was a lot of fun. It's something like that. It's just, when you see, it's like when you see a movie or something, if, and there's a cameo of a character from a previous story, that stuff's always fun. So that was very, very enjoyable to do that. Let me look at this here, see what other, I'm going through the content here to see what other little tidbits are in here. Obviously, because I was dealing with this battle in the bios, we had talked about the fact that the angels fell to Maxilius the Harvester. So Maxilius, even though this particular story was meant to highlight Yosef and the Gold Skeleton, which are two characters that are available in the Ashes of Agbendor wave, this particular short story, I think, did a lot to add more to the lore and legend of Maxilius the Harvester, right? One of my favorite scenes, because when I write this, I've heard a lot of people say I'd love to see this as an animated series or a live action. Yes, so would I. I imagine some of that. Look at this character, this skeleton with these fused eye sockets. I'm imagining this scene where Yosef attacks him and just beats him with the wings in a way that like he's having a hard time moving and he's disoriented and confused. And then Yosef, instead of trying to hurt him, just grabs his weapons and yanks them away and flies off. Like it's something unexpected. And I imagine this previously silent Reaper just opening his mouth and just screaming, just a wail, like just a horrible, chilling wail where all those around it, I describe it as they clasp their hands to their ears and their eyes are leaking blood, tears of blood. It's just a scene where, I mean, this character he is just an absolute monster. He is the unstoppable force. And I love, we did this with the Necronominus wave where everyone expected Necronominus to be a Reaper, whereas Necronominus is more of like a dark pope. And the fact that Necronominus doesn't kill anybody. Necronominus's powers are raising the dead. The Harvester is the one that does the reaping, the killing and stuff. So that whole scene of just him wailing and killing these angels, just a chilling kind of character here. If you didn't get Maxilius the Harvester, I'm sure after reading this story, you're like, I need to get a Maxilius the Harvester. So those are all things that I really kind of enjoyed in this. There is also some other lore here. We named Sir Gregory, which is the first member of the Heavensbrand family. That's actually in the book as well. I actually had to go back to the book to remember what name I used in the book. But one of the things we talk about in the book is that, after the First Great War, when the Legions of Light were formed, there was a member that led each one, each person that led the four heroic kingdoms, Leandor, Xylernia, Etheros, and Ophidian. The person that would lead that took that weapon of power from the great beasts, they took the name of that weapon as their surname and the surname of their family. So Gideon Heavensbrand, which his original name has been lost to time, but he is the first one to lead the Order of Aetheron after the First Great War and the departure of the great beasts. So that name, I don't know that I've put it out. It's definitely in the book. Sometimes I forget which teasers I've shared already, whether that was in any of the teasers I shared, but that's another named character that we have from this first Age of the Realm. Even just other stuff like, the Terperculi is in this, Necronominus was in there, Conibus is in this. So there's a lot of different characters that get to be a part of this short story, just kind of ancillary to the major players, of course, who are Yosef, the Fallen Angels, and Maxilius the Harvester. So there we go. I'm going to go to the comments here. I'm going to see what people have to say here. Big G people were saying, yes, Tales of the Mercurian Tavern. Greg, I was waiting for you to text me all day. I don't know if you read the short story. Greg, tell me, either message me or tell me in the chat. Me reading this tonight, was that your first time hearing this story, or had you read it earlier? Had people sent it to you saying like, Sir Uxak, he's in the short story, he survives? I'm curious if people told you that. Yeah, Greg, excuse me for me doing your voice. I know you don't speak like that, but I imagine Sir Ukzak is a creature of few words. Shmur and Berber, yes, I wish this was a film too. It would be great to see this. Is Gadriel lost? So Gadriel is part of the modern story. So if you actually read the bio for Yosef, it refers to the fact that after, this time, he went back to Cirrus, and, it would be many years before another of his kind would be seen, would walk in mythos again. That was a nod to Gadriel, because her bio talks about the fact that she wasn't supposed to leave Cirrus, that the angels were not going to interfere, and she refused. And I know that basically because of the kind of sacrifice of Yosef, in his battalion, like she took heart in them standing up and doing what they had to protect the realm. So that's one of the reasons she leaves Cirrus and comes to help. She is part of the modern story. My hairs are standing up. Well, I hope that was for a good reason. I hope it was chilling to hear this. Angels in this world would be essentially immortals. So angels are like the elves. They're immortal beings. They can only die through violent means, essentially. Yeah, we're writing a little bit about the angels, both in the bio for Yosef, in the gold skeleton, and also here. That was kind of fun too, because personally, I had done angel customs many years ago, and I always liked the idea of getting more angels in the line. And they're one of those things that Gadriel got thrown in an Advent of Decay many years ago. A little bit of story about the celestial city of Cirrus, and we've never visited them again. So for me as a fan, it's always been a question mark. Like, I want to know more about them. So getting the chance to explore that, I think, was very good. Yes, Eduardo, Shui sounds like Dumbledore. That's old wizard voice. I'm not a voice actor, so bear with me. I've very limited in what I can do, but I do picture Shui sounding like Dumbledore, and that is Richard Harris Dumbledore. That is what is in my head. Sir Ukzak will be in the books, of course. Yeah, he'll be in there. Just going through the comments. So Greg is telling me, first time right now, nobody said anything. So that's awesome. So you got to hear me read this story and hear Sir Ukzak, and you were like, whoa, I'm in it. Yeah, that's awesome. That makes me so happy, Greg. So happy. So that's what I've got for you tonight. Mythic Legions has always been a challenging property to market because no one knows what the story is, right? When I started buying this, I wasn't buying these figures because I loved the story. I thought the figures looked very cool. And I've said this before, when I talk to people and I meet people at shows and they say to me, like, is this a comic? Is this a movie? Is this, a video game, whatever? And I say, well, we have a lot of those things coming. We're working on, a book. We're working on a video game, which, they released the character customizer recently. But what I always tell people is, when you want to tell a story, you tell it in the way you know how. If you know how to, if you're a filmmaker, you create a movie. If you draw and write, and you make a comic book, or whatever the medium you know how to work in is how you tell your story. Well, when Four Horsemen Studios wanted to tell this story, they made toys because that's what they did. They're toy guys. So they made toys. So it's so unique in the sense that there's so much out there. There's so much story out there. And now we're trying to formalize it with stuff like this. So I'm so incredibly honored to be able to helm some of these stories and bring this stuff. I genuinely cannot wait to get the Rise of the Dark 4 book into people's hands so we can talk more about it. But until that time, we've got stuff like this. We've got these short stories, which will hopefully hold us over and give you a little bit of a sense of this world, this realm of mythos that we're creating. With that, I do have a few just reminders. Carver Customs, reminder that the Ralph Moss Memorial ends Sunday at 4 p.m. We have more break prizes to announce, so still be sure to grab some spots. I can announce that Four Horsemen Studios is going to be donating a couple gift cards. I think we're going to donate like 4 $50 gift cards, as well as a couple test shots. So Cookie was pulling some test shots today. I just got to find out which ones he pulled, but we're going to donate a few test shots in there along with a few $100 in raffle and gift cards. So, beyond that, there's tons of great stuff from a ton of wonderful Legionnaires, all going to a good cause to help the family of one of our own who's no longer with us. So, say a little prayer for his family. And if you are so inclined, get in on this raffle, get a chance to win some really cool stuff and help some people out in the process. Beyond that, Mythic Legions, Ashes of Agbendor, once again, ends this Sunday. I've reminded people, recently on these shows, remember, these things get made based on these pre-orders. So we thank you for your support of Four Horsemen Studios, of the things we do. I met so many people this weekend at Joe Fest that thanked us for doing what we do. Whenever we do shows, we hear such amazing stories from people who tell us what these toys and this community means to them. So much more than we could have ever expected when, we started making some of these things. We're pretty simple. We make these things to make cool toys and tell cool stories. The fact that it's made such an impact on people's lives is incredible to us. I'm at a loss for words right now, and which is if you know me, that's very rare. But it's incredible to hear these stories and people thanking us. But what I said to everybody is, seriously, thank you. Dude, I'm living my best life. This is a dream come true for me, to be able to do what I do, to be able to play the role I play in telling these stories and bringing these characters and bringing these toys to life. So the support of everyone watching this show and all the Legionnaires for a pre-order like Ashes of Agbendor, you allow us to keep doing it. So thank you very much. Hit up storehorseman.com by this Sunday night. Get your Ashes of Agbendor figure, your pre-order in. Hopefully going to have that in your hand in about a year's time. Everything is tooled. So it's just getting it into the production schedule amidst everything else that we are working on. We're going to talk more about that stuff we're working on next week's Mythic Conversations, where I'm going to start talking about some cool stuff that you can expect from IshCon and maybe some little surprises. Until next week, everybody, thank you very much. Have a good weekend. Stay positive and be cool to each other, everybody.